It is time now for our next guest, and I've been reading his book called Bet the Farm, How Food Stopped Being Food, for the past week, and I haven't gotten through it yet. I've been so crazy busy, but every time I pick it up, I don't want to put it down because it is so well written, and it's one of those books you want to read, but then,
you don't want to.
Yes.
You want to stay in your comfortable ignorance.
Yes.
Yes.
No, that is the case. You start reading it, and it turns your stomach, I guess, when you start to realize our food system and how things work or don't work, as the case may be. In fact, one of the press pieces that comes with the book says, we grow enough food to feed the world twice over, yet starvation and malnutrition are at an all-time high.
So we can't wait to ask him, what's the problem?
What causes that? Frederick Kaufman, author of the book Bet the Farm, joins us right now on the line, and a very good day to you, sir.
Good day to you.
Thank you for joining us. What would cause a situation like that where we grow enough food to feed the world twice over, yet people are starving at record rates?
I think greed causes that, Randall, if we have to pin it on one word.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line with hunger is that people don't starve because there isn't enough food. People starve because they can't afford the price of food. And that's what set me off on the journey of this book, this notion of, well, if people are starving because they can't afford the food, how does food get its price?
I love how you start the book because you pull in the reader with something all of us are familiar with, pizza, and not just any pizza, Domino's pizza, and you go through the entire supply chain for Domino's with the theory that we could feed the world using pizza. And then it's so fascinating the way you go through the sauce and the dough and the cheese and how the system has been tweaked to supply these huge providers of pizza. Domino's and Pizza Hut are Papa John's, I think, was the third one.
Yes.
And it comes from such a limited number of suppliers, and then you come to the conclusion that, no, indeed, pizza can't feed the world, and that's one of the problems.
Yes, I really, it was somewhat tongue-in-cheek that I thought, well, maybe pizza is the answer to global hunger, and I called up Domino's, and unfortunately for them, I guess in retrospect, they let me in, and they showed me their dough-making factory, and they brought me to their corporate headquarters. And what was fascinating is what you discover that a pizza really is. And on one level, I think we understand that it's industrial food. It's industrial wheat and industrial vegetable oil and industrial tomatoes. But behind that, there's a whole other level that my research uncovered, which is that not only are we seeing layers of industrialization, we're seeing layers of financialization and securitization in the sense that every one of these ingredients is a financial product too, a globally traded transnational commodity traded on commodity exchanges all around the world. And these commodity exchanges have been transformed recently by Wall Street.
Now, how likely is it that system, the using food as a commodity, how likely is that would ever change?
That is a great question. You know, what's interesting about it is that commodity exchanges have traditionally been a way to keep the price of food stable. In other words, you have a problem with food and civilization, which is that people in cities need food every day. But of course, food is not available, doesn't come out of the ground every day. It only comes out of the ground seasonally. And so people who are involved need to keep a stable price, and that's kind of the main role, to a certain extent, of civilization. And so about 150 years ago, right after the Civil War, commodity markets were created in this country to help stabilize the price of food. But what's happened is over the last 10, 15 years, Wall Street, using some very fancy and Baroque new food derivative products, have figured out a way to subvert those markets and turn them into profit machines for themselves.
One of the problems with so few companies being in charge of, in your pizza instance, the tomato sauce, the dairy products that go along with the pizza making.
The wheat and the dough.
You point out that market forces like that put small farmers out of business because they just can't compete on that level.
That's absolutely right. So you have two things going on. On the industrial level, you have huge corporations that are moving in all over the world and driving down the price of basic foods so that they're driving all farmers off the land everywhere. These farmers then can no longer make a living planting their smaller acreage of tomatoes. They move to the city where they cannot afford the tomato sauce on their takeout pizza. Because at the same time that we're seeing this industrialization and this race towards the bottom that's pushing the small farmers out, we're seeing the securitization that's also pushing on the financial level the commodity prices up.
And we think about this just in the United States. It's not just in the United States. This is worldwide.
Well, in the United States, hunger is a problem. We have more people than ever on food stamps. And in 2008, right, at Trader Joe's, there were limits on the amount of rice you could buy. There was a food riot in Milwaukee. But really, hunger plays out differently throughout the rest of the world. And right now, we're looking at, the number is slippery, but it's looking like more than 900 million hungry people. I just spent Thanksgiving week in Ethiopia, and we're looking at 40% of the people don't have enough to eat over there.
40%, wow.
It's a really extraordinary and terrifying.
And yet you say that we're making more food than enough because, I hear the argument, especially, we live in a heavily ag area. We hear the argument that it is a struggle to feed the world and farmers need to use certain practices in order to feed the world. But you're basically saying we can feed the world, but it's the system that's not working.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that when there's so much out there about we're at 7 billion and we're going to go to 9 billion, that we have a new middle class in India and China that are more meatified. They're eating meat, which of course takes more diesel and fertilizer and insecticide and grain input. And of course, through the American Midwest, we had the drought this past summer, a drought which has continued. So all of these are very serious issues, along with biofuel mandates. These are all serious issues in terms of the supply side. But even so, we are seeing yields which are bringing in food, and certainly on the level of the basic grains, which are more than enough to feed everybody.
Stop
and this is the history of hunger, too.
And welcome back to the program, Mr. Kaufman. We often on the show here encourage people to buy as locally as possible when it comes to food. We have a huge farmers market that right behind me here. If you are watching
every
online, every Thursday night is a huge foodie event. But you say that buying local can't necessarily solve this problem of trying to save the food problem in the world.
Well, Randall, I think that buying local is a great thing. And I believe that agroecological farming methods and better relationships between urban and rural environments are key to the final solution. I mean, where we're ultimately heading is there. What I'm saying is that in order to get, however, to that place, we're going to have to do some other types of reforms, larger reforms for Wall Street, larger reforms in terms of patent laws. In Washington, around the world, regulation of global derivatives. Those are the kinds of actions that are needed now that food has become global, and a lot of the price of food has been subverted by some of the top and greatest financial interests in the world.
Are the patent laws a problem because of genetically modified food?
I spent almost a year investigating in genetic modification laboratories, yes, and I saw hundreds of yet-to-be-released genetically modified foods in genetic modification laboratories across the United States. And one of the things that's fascinating here is that the scientists themselves, who I spoke to, actually have very good intentions. They would like to feed the world. They think that their products are going to help to feed the world. And so it made me think, what is really wrong here? What do we hate about genetic modified foods? And what I realized is that you have tremendously bad players here. You have DuPont and you have Syngenta and you have Monsanto. So how do we get them out of the business? And one of the ways is to transform the plant patent laws in Washington. The plant patents are what allows them their intellectual property over, let's say, their suicide seeds. And if we could take those laws and reform them, we could take the money out of it. And then what we could do is we could say, okay, this monopolistic, very bad practice, which is all about Roundup Ready crops and furthering insecticide, we could push that out because there is no money in it for them. And we could actually make some room for scientists who are trying to do something in their laboratories that could conceivably help.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about it, we have to breathe air, we need water, and we need food. It's something we all share around the globe. These are essentials for us to remain alive. It almost seems like it's something we're entitled to. But if we can't afford it and if it's profit-driven, it when you just get down to the basics, it just doesn't make sense.
That really goes to the essence. That's kind of the essential nut of this whole thing, which is that food is not a color television set or a car or a mortgage-backed security, And so when food becomes virtual, when food becomes meta, when it becomes an index, when it becomes a derivative product, it stops being food. And this has devastating consequences.
We really do look at it differently than perhaps we should. There are certain things we take for granted, like there should be a local fire department, right? That we all, if we call 911, a paramedic should arrive, right? Mm-hmm. And those sorts of things that we just depend on, the sewer system,
we all, at least here in the United States, we all expect to work right.
Expect to have that.
That's right.
It is interesting that food is far more essential than some of the other things I mentioned there, yet they're not treated that same. It's not treated that same way.
Well, I think there are government supports obviously out there, SNAP programs, there's school supports, and these things are all essential in terms of making sure that people in this country don't go hungry. You move outside of this country, you move to the undeveloped world, you move away from Europe, and what you find is that none of these programs are in place. And so when people dip below a certain income level, and at the same time the food prices are spiking, they've just moved from middle class existence into a food insecure existence. And what happens? Well, we saw what happened in the Arab Spring. What happened in Egypt is they were seeing their food inflation up to about 40% of their weekly paycheck. Here in the United States, we're spending maybe 12 to 14% of our weekly paycheck on food. Can you imagine your take was half of food?
Can you repeat that last portion there? We had a little glitch in the phone line. Did you say?
What I was saying is, imagine if half of your take-home pay had to be devoted to grocery bills and food. Imagine, this is precisely what leads to revolution and revolt around the world. It led to the Arab Spring because they're buying their food much closer. They're not buying Wheaties. They're buying wheat. And in the past 10 years, the price of wheat has doubled and doubled again, and is still rising. And so this has had, once again, devastating consequences. And I think after 9/11, and I think after the Arab Spring, I think people in this country understand we're no longer isolated from what happens in Egypt, from what happens around the world. And so it really is in all of our best interest to try to regulate and stabilize the price of global food.
So we've talked so much about what the problem is and the shape of the problem. How do we solve it? How do we move in a better direction?
Well, the first thing is to get the bankers out of the food system. And that regulation is a fairly easy move. We simply have to say, they're called position limits in commodity markets. And we're saying, if you're not an actual dealer in real food, then you cannot take as large a position you like in these markets. In other words, if you're a Goldman Sachs, you cannot take the same position as, let's say, General Mills. And those position limits actually were in place since the Agriculture Act of 1936. They were then abolished in the late 90s in our mania for deregulation. And in fact, once again, they were part of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. But unfortunately, a week before they were supposed to go into effect, they were stopped in Washington, D.C. District Court. So one of the things we can do is fight for position limits.
All right, Frederick Kaufman, author of the book Bet the Farm, How Food Stopped Being Food. It is a fantastic read. I can't wait to finish it. I do have a little more time this week, so I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of this. And I'm so impressed with his level of access to some of these big companies and just the accolades on the back by some of the top food people. Really, it's a fantastic book. Frederick Kaufman, thank you for joining us today here at Eat, Drink, Explore Radio.
Thank you so much.
And we have, like I said, the links are available online at eatdrinkexplore.com under our program summary. Stay dry, everyone, and thanks for joining us once again here on Sunday morning.